It's finally August, and the Jets are still relatively kicking it quietly. Not a lot going on this offseason, but the Jets still have some work to do before the start of the regular season in 2 months.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are going to be catching up. Obviously, things have been pretty quiet with the Jets. This offseason, I think, for the most part, has been relatively uneventful, which, I mean, I don't mind necessarily. I don't think every offseason has to be drama-filled and explosive, but I think if you're a Jets fan, you were probably hoping for maybe a bit more. But it is August, Obviously, the month started last week. But we're finally getting into, I guess, the first couple of weeks now. And with the Jets still needing to take care of a fair bit of stuff, I kind of wonder what is left for them to accomplish over the next 2 months. Winnipeg obviously is not going to finish every single thing on its task list, is my guess. I just think that there's some stuff that's probably going to be pushed past the start of the season, whether they go through with it for, multiple months or if they try to get it early in the start of the season, or maybe even figure it out in the following offseason. Either way, the Jets are probably just going to be patient, as they always are. And again, not always the worst thing, but there are some things that are probably a little more time sensitive, and I wonder if Winnipeg is maybe waiting just a touch too long to solve some of these questions. Before we dive into what remains, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more because, of course, as all of the playoffs have wound down or are over, obviously these sports aren't sporting the way we want them to, but FanDuel wants to make your summer hotter than ever by hooking all customers up with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, August has been, to start off with, pretty quiet for the Jets. I guess the only thing of note was that one of the last free agent targets that I was maybe interested in, Oliver Shillington, has actually signed with Colorado. The Avs have made a lot of relatively interesting swings on their blue line, almost all of them really cheap one-year deals. The nice thing about being the Avs is that you can convince players who maybe would get shots elsewhere with some term to take a one-year show-me kind of contract. For Colorado, I guess, it's relatively low risk. Their blue line has tended to be very fast and certainly prizes a lot more skating skill and transition ability over being big, stout, and strong. Not that they don't have those players, but when you watch how they have tried to build their blue line this offseason, you notice that their signings are guys like Brandstrom, Shillington, players of that ilk. I guess DeHaan is a little more traditional in some ways, although DeHaan, he's also, or at least in his peak in his prime, was a relatively good puck-moving blue liner, not somebody who was just known to shut down with nothing but shot blocks, right? He was really good at a lot of things. Less so these days. But again, I think it's just a window into their psyche and how they've managed to run their offseason. I think, with respect to the Jets, Winnipeg has kind of opted to take a little bit of a quieter approach. The McGroarty thing really hasn't moved much, which I think is interesting. After, some real burst of activity towards the start of the summer, it's been really quiet. We really haven't seen much at all other than that whole Frank Saravalli report, which somebody was suggesting that I was calling him out, which yes, I was. In fact, Mike McIntyre, it was Scott Billick from one of the local Winnipeg groups that kind of said his tweet about the Jets having offered that package up was false, which is correct. The Jets, if they had actually wanted to offer that package, we would have heard through other sources first. Winnipeg is very closely guarded when it comes to their trade packages and stuff. And I think that still holds. So unless, they really got crazy in the front office and made some ridiculous offer, I can guarantee you that package was on Carolina's end. It just makes some common sense, right? This is how the Jets have always been. So, I don't really have any problems with suggesting that somebody got it wrong, because they did. And I think Winnipeg is in an interesting spot where, you're not really hearing as many other links right now. There were teams earlier that were definitely interested, but I think it partly depends on what happens with Columbus. I still feel like there is some sort of a marriage between the Blue Jackets and the Jets on a whole Line A, Jiricek, or something of a similar caliber swap with Rutger and I don't know, another player. Iafallo, Pionk, who knows? I really think that there is some sort of a framework there. Whether the Jackets are interested in it's debatable, but I think that there is something to be said about them maybe trying to, trade from positions of strength to upgrade their forward group. Because like the Jackets, their attacking prowess is definitely limited. And I think Rutger actually checks off some leadership-y kind of things too. And I think a lot of you are probably going to laugh and say, leadership with his character, really? But he's just not necessarily interested in playing for the Jets. That may not mean that he's actually, got true character problems. One thing I will say is that his agent is not proving to be all that easy to work with. So that could be a bit of a monkey wrench in whatever plans the Jets are trying to figure out. But I feel like the McGroarty trade also decides what happens with the Jets trying to pursue maybe a larger trade for either a defender or a top 6 center of some sort. I still feel like the Jets have an interest in doing one of those two things. It's not like they've really resolved it this offseason, but by the same token, this team has also kind of preached about internal development, and maybe that's where they're hoping to bank, a lot of their success going forward. They missed out on a bunch of free agents. They ended up not really making too many trades, and they mostly took care of business internally, extensions and the like. So again, I think I started off, what did I give the Jets offseason? Like a C+ or a B-. I think that's still roughly where I'm at. The Perfetti deal could change things a bit, but I mean, overall, it's just been quiet. And I feel like for a pretty pivotal offseason, I was hoping for a little bit more. I think you don't have to do everything in the next 2 months, but deciding what happens with Ehlers and McGroarty is definitely a big priority. I just don't think you want to get to the trade deadline through the second season and not really have answers for either of them. Ehlers, of course, if he's still with the Jets at that point, he probably is either getting traded or they're viewing him as an internal rental. I don't know about an extension. I know some people in the comments have been a little more, I guess, bold with those predictions, but I still feel like his agent's probably going to just ask him to hold out for another team, which I can't blame him. I get it. Assuming it gets to that point, I wouldn't really hold it against him if he decides to leave, because, one thing to remember is when he is not playing a lot and not being allowed to score that much as a result, that does impact his salary negotiations. And you might say he's making a ton of money already, and you're not wrong, but relatively speaking, he's probably had his earnings per season probably reduced by 2 to 3 million. Being played something akin to more of a bottom sixer has definitely done a number to the sorts of salary negotiations that he can realistically earn on his next contract. So, if Ehlers does want to leave, I still get it. And I think the Jets are just going to have to live with that and find a good replacement, whether it's internal or as part of whatever trade they're trying to make here. But the number of targets and destinations that's actually going to give them a decent return, probably not that big anymore. So we'll just have to be patient, I guess. But it is August. Like I said, I think I'd like to have some of these questions answered before the start of the season. But knowing the Jets, they are certainly patient, if nothing else. And sometimes that's gotten them into trouble, but recently it hasn't ended so badly. So I guess I just have to put my faith with the team on this one. But curious to know how you're feeling about the offseason. Are you satisfied? Are you sort of unsatisfied and unfulfilled? Do you feel like the Jets are waiting too long to get this stuff taken care of? Drop your thoughts in comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Up next, kind of on a related note, just wanted to talk about the Jets basically skipping free agency in terms of a lot of external acquisitions. Did the Jets make the right play? Was this a mistake? Let's chat about that in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. I love sports and I love them so much that I wish they never ended. But of course, the NHL playoffs are over. They've been over for a while now. We're waiting for the baseball playoffs to roll through. But until then, we've got the Olympics at least, which is awesome for most of us. Maybe for some of you Team Canada fans, the recent sporting events have been a little bit of a mixed bag. A couple of successes, some really big failures. But you know what? No matter what, FanDuel wants to help you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up any bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Go to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we're just chatting about Winnipeg's progress this offseason, and it's been, again, pretty quiet. Like I said, I think I have some mixed feelings about where they've basically settled things at this stage in August. It's getting kind of close to the start of the season, a little over 2 months now remaining before, Winnipeg kicks off on the 9th or 10th of October. So there's not a lot of time left for them to sort out some of these bigger questions, especially because some of the nature of what they're trying to do, it's complex and requires some pretty serious negotiations. So lots to still figure out for the Jets. But like I said, overall offseason, they've gotten some of their big stuff off the plate. It's just there's a couple of big elephants in the room that continue to be a real pain in the butt. And some of that I felt like could have been alleviated a bit with free agency. I want to talk about that in just a second. But before we go too much further, just wanted to recommend that you make your second listen the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, coming back to the Jets offseason, I guess one of the big things and big takeaways is that they basically skipped free agency. And I don't mean that they didn't do anything in free agency. That would be disingenuous. But in terms of a lot of external acquisitions, you saw a lot of teams loading up, I think, and that was the general vibe I got, especially in the Central. The Central was very free agent oriented. We saw some big signings. We kind of saw some big departures for teams like Dallas, but Nashville definitely upgraded. The Blackhawks really spent a load of money, although whether they really got better is kind of up for debate. But, all the same, they're going to be less of a pushover. Still bad, but less of a pushover. But I guess what it comes down to is, right, the Jets are one of those teams that I don't feel has ever been a really great fit for building through free agency. That's not the way the Jets should approach things, and I don't think them sitting out for most of the big signings is a bad thing. I've sort of talked about them skipping on Monahan before, and I think that was the right choice, although that wasn't really their choice. I want to kind of caution this by saying Winnipeg wanted to pay him 5 by 5, reportedly, versus what he got at 5.5 by 5. So it's not like they weren't trying. And I think if they had pulled it off, it would have been a big problem. Look, the contract itself might not seem like a ton, but when you think about the roster blockages it might create and the fact that Monahan, for me, just doesn't quite move the needle in the way that the Jets need for their 2C, he would kind of present a decent amount of cash tied up in that center position for a decent amount of years. Now, I'm happy for him. I'm thrilled that he got paid. Like, he definitely deserved to get a raise somewhere. I just, for a lot of reasons, I didn't think the Jets would be the right fit. If there was one free agent that I thought you probably did have to bring back, it was DeMello, right? The Jets just don't have another Dylan DeMello available right now. I do think Elias Salamonson at some point will inherit that role, and then you sort of start to ratchet down DeMello's minutes. But until he's ready to do that, obviously you needed DeMello to at least anchor the top pairing for the next 2 to 3 years, which I think makes a lot of sense. In the grand scheme of things, it is a little expensive for what he is at this point, but he's happy. He's a fun dad. He's a player that the Jets really seem to like, and I think that's nice. I think it's good that, if you're going to reward a veteran player and you're going to pay him a pretty rich price tag, then make sure that it's a guy who's really brought, everyday contributions and who's actually really worth that cash. And I think DeMello has really proven his value to this team. So overall, I think that's fine. I think where I kind of wish the Jets had maybe been a little more aggressive, and there's still time for them to do some of this stuff, but I really would have liked some margin signings, right? And this may kind of change as they get closer to training camp and preseason, but I feel like there's some decent younger players out there who, look, maybe for one reason or another, their NHL careers have sort of stalled out. And I think this is a chance for the Jets to maybe give them a contract and see what they have in store. And it's not like they may not do any of this. Winnipeg has had some good camp invites before, and maybe they're going to do that again. I just thought, again, I've talked about players like Zadina and company. I think those are low-risk bets, relatively speaking, with some intriguing upside, especially guys with good skating. I think that is an underrated thing that the Jets have needed to do is get faster and more skilled. Yamamoto, I've talked about him before, maybe not in that range as much. Sprong, I thought would have been an intriguing bet, but for one reason or another, he really could not get more than like $1 million, which is very interesting. 1 year, a little under $1 million with the Canucks. Good luck to him. I think for Vancouver, they certainly got a guy who's going to pot around 10 to 15 goals at least per season. So for less than a cup of coffee, basically, you really can't complain about that. But for the Jets, it's interesting that they were less inclined to either make that offer or really pursue with, term or something. I thought, it would have been fine if they'd even gone for him at like $2.5 to $3 million by a couple of years, but they didn't. So that's cool. I get it. Apparently, I do wonder if that whole character thing has kind of come up again. I've heard some stuff over the years about Sprong maybe having some motivation issues or maybe not being as hard of a worker. Even Vancouver said something about him having to mature over the years. So that, I guess, probably gives at least a minor hint as to why he's been sitting as a free agent for so long, but interesting all the same. So, like I said, I think I don't hate missing on the big free agent stuff. At first, when Toffoli first joined, I thought, oh man, the Jets have to bring this dude back. But the more he played here, the less of a fit he really seemingly was for the longer term. So again, I think if the Jets mostly focused on guys like DeMello, core players that are really important, sounds like they might be doing some longer term stuff with Perfetti too. I don't hate that. And if the Jets can lock down Perfetti for like 5+ years, I would be ecstatic. I think that's the kind of stuff that really makes sense. That Ville Heinola contract I thought was really savvy. 2 years at a little over league minimum is a really nice gamble. And I think it sets Ville up for potentially not only some real salary guarantees, which I know sounds silly, but like you can't overstate the importance of NHL versus minor league money. And so I think that for him is great. And it also gives him a chance to perhaps get a nice raise at the end of his deal. Because like $800K or whatever, basically nothing. But for the Jets, that's a nice cost-controlled, cost-certain asset for 2 years. And I think Heinola is going to prove to be a really solid third-pairing guy, perhaps with some upside to be more than that. We'll see if he gets to that stage. Obviously, he's kind of on the pecking order behind Sandberg and Morrissey, and I don't expect that to change. But that doesn't mean that you have to run all those pairs in like a 1-2-3 clearly, right? If you ran the second and third pairing at a reasonable maybe somewhat equal deployment based on what happens with Heinola and maybe Miller, I think that could make a really solid group to round out the bottom pairings. So, yeah, this offseason, I guess if you're skipping free agency, then just make sure that when you do make your signings, they're big impact signings. And I think the Jets have generally done that. Bringing Kakinen and Comrie in, I think, does a decent job of not only creating some camp competition for the backup spot, but Kakinen actually might just be really decent. And we know that Comrie can at times be pretty solid too. So I don't know if he'll be as good this third or fourth time around, but certainly can't hate the cheap gamble. And I think a lot of guys actually like having Eric around. He seems to really like the Jets org. So for me, it's just I don't know, good vibes all around. Can't hate it. And I think that's sort of the general vibe around a lot of Winnipeg's offseason signings. Like I said, the only thing I would have done really differently, I guess, is maybe gone for a few more of these show me kind of deals. I think you could potentially come up with some really interesting contracts. Maybe they'll do a PTO or something as we start getting closer to preseason and camp, and that could be interesting. If you get a Zadina on like an ATO or a PTO of some sort, and maybe you can see if he's got something left in the tank, I could definitely see him potentially earning a spot. I still hold a flame for some of these younger players who have a rare package of skills and physical traits, and maybe their older teams just weren't that interested in making the most of them. But you look at their records and stuff, and there's something there to it, right? They may not be as bad as you see on the surface, and that's where Winnipeg's renewed interest in data science could be really helpful as they start rolling into this season and beyond. But we're just going to have to be patient. I think that's the general vibe we've had with this offseason is be patient, wait for stuff to happen. Sometimes we wait a little bit too long, but can I really complain? I guess not. It's been, if nothing else, they've dodged bullets. So in that respect, I can't be too upset. But this season, we're also going to have a very interesting break in February. And I talked on a previous episode about the Olympics, and I think the Jets are also likely to have some representatives for this February break go to the Four Nations face-off. We'll chat about that in just a quick moment. But before we go too much further, did want to shout out our wonderful hiring friends at Indeed. Obviously, when it comes to building a championship team, we have to search for great candidates, right? You're trying to find players and stuff that really build your must-win, must-have conditions for a true championship team. But Indeed has a different approach, right? We don't have to always search for the best candidates. Indeed helps you match with candidates instead. Their platform helps you not only match, but also schedule, screen, and message all in one easy-to-use, simple platform that helps you connect with quality candidates faster. They do all the busy work. They help you schedule interviews and get you set up, and they also help you hire faster. So many folks who have used Indeed for employment and those who are actually job hosters, they find that they get the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. And as somebody who has actually used Indeed myself, I can personally attest to the fact that it was, as a job seeker, it was very easy to use, very clear and concise. There were tons of data entry fields that let me customize my profile and actually gave me matches to jobs that kind of fit what I was interested in. Actually fit them quite well, I would say, based on my past work experiences. And 3.5 million businesses out there already use Indeed to find some of the top quality candidates in this industry. If you're one of those businesses looking for a way to hire better, Indeed is here to help. And listeners of the show will even get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Winnipeg Jets. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's closing thoughts as we're just chatting a little bit about an upcoming event, the Four Nations Face-Off in February. It'll be February 12th through 20th, 2025. I know, seems really distant, but when you start actually getting into the season, it does tend to go pretty quickly. I think, once you're in October, you really think about it. November, December, January, and then it's February. Before you even know it, the Four Nations face-off break will be here. It's going to be 8 days of fun. There's going to be 7 games with 4 different teams: Canada, Finland, Sweden, USA. And in the round robin, you get 3 tournament games per team, which is going to be great. In my mind, I think that's awesome. Obviously, the standings stuff is relatively similar to the NHL with one little quirk. Their points totals actually reflect something more like footy, I would say. You get 3 points for a regulation win, 2 points for an OT or a shootout win, and 1 point for an OT shootout loss. So that extra point is perhaps going to be an interesting little stratification change for regulation victories. But the 2 teams with the best records then go on to the final championship game. I think all of this is, for me, very interesting because the Jets are likely to have at least a couple of representatives. For Team USA, I think is probably where you're going to see most of them. There's an outside chance that Scheifele makes Team Canada, but other than that, I don't know if any other Canadian players beyond Josh Morrissey. Josh Morrissey, I think, really should get consideration. Whether Team Canada agrees is sort of out of my control, I guess, but I think he really does deserve a chance to be on Team Canada. He's certainly one of those guys who was up there in the Norris running last year, and for the past 2 seasons, he's been one of the best defenders in the league. So I hope somebody recognizes that and gives him a call up, at least for this international tournament. It'd be great, especially if he can kind of keep this up for the next couple of years ahead of the Winter Olympics in 2026. But for Team USA, I mean, Kyle Connor and Connor Hellebuck, my guess would be our 2 representatives. We do have some other solid American players, but I mean those guys far and away are 2 big names that I think would be going. We don't really have any Swedes, so unless Salamatson somehow ends up with the first pairing with the Jets out of training camp, which I can tell you is not happening, well, we're probably not sending anyone, right? So that's fine. I think even sending just a couple of representatives to this tournament, just a brief little 4-team thing, I think is really fun. I think this is a great little teaser ahead of the actual Olympics in a couple of years. I think we've all kind of been, at least to some degree, craving international hockey again. Not having the World Cup of Hockey for the last several years, not having the Olympics, it just sucks. I know that the World Championships and World Juniors kind of fill the gap, but if you ask me, it's just not the same thing, right? You really want something prestigious. The World Cup of Hockey honestly wouldn't have been that amazing unless if they had not had that Team North America. I think that made the tournament so much more fun. We don't have that this time, but I still think it should be a really cool little preview ahead of I'm hoping a pretty big Olympics in 2026. Obviously, the first time the NHL is going to be back in many, many years. I was hoping that it would happen, and I'm glad that they didn't, make that agreement. I'm sure there's lots of complicated money reasons and stuff for why it's been a problem. I know health insurance and stuff was one consideration, and I'm sure there's lots of other things that happen with the IOC, but at the very least, it's just nice that we're finally getting some high quality international hockey again. I will say that the Pyeongchang Olympics were really fun, even though you didn't have really any NHLers. It was still just a great tournament, and you got some really cool stuff with some of the players who have even, been in the minor leagues over here or have been playing abroad in some of the competitive leagues in Korea and Japan and a few others. So just a nice tournament that we're finally getting, a nice little break from the NHL season. And I would expect at least a couple of representatives from Winnipeg to be icing or to hit the skates, to lace their skates for at least Team USA. Hopefully Team Canada brings a rep or 2. We'll see. After that, I don't think we're sending anyone for Finland or Sweden. Although I say that if Brad Lambert really kills it in the first couple of months for the Jets, just maybe he gets some consideration. But I think we're probably a ways away from him making an international lineup. So if he does, though, oh gosh, he's going to be in the Calder front running spot, I'm sure. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But let me know if you're excited about the Four Nations face-off. Are you going to be watching? Drop your thoughts and excitement about international hockey, or if you're not really that interested, also, I guess just let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks again for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. While you're at it, be sure to go check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the Locked On NHL link in the description, so you don't need to search. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.